Good evening, and thank you all. And hi, Sudeep. Good to see everybody here. Absolutely delighted to have three very interesting speakers. Hervé Delphin, as we announced ambassador, he said, "Oh, boring." Not boring at all, and we'll explore the idea of the European Union and what it means. Professor Mukulika Banerjee, an old friend of the festival, who I've known, I think, for 25 years. I'm 32, so we may have met each other when we were 7 or 8, I can't remember. And of course, Brian Murray, who's come for the first time. It's taken him a long time to come out to the Jaipur Literature Festival, though this is a place of books. So, Brian, I'm going to start with you. Ever since you've joined as the CEO of the HarperCollins Group, you've increased its revenues many times over. According to one of the reports I read, it's now 2 billion from 350 million, etc. And three specific areas that you looked at. You looked beyond English publishing, and you looked at 16 different languages. You looked at digital publishing, and then you all also bought a publishing house which published Christian theology. Can you tell us a little bit specifically around the digital aspect, and how do you see that growing in today's day and age? And what's the challenge that we have there, even as China now has created a whole new technology as of day before yesterday?
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here in Jaipur. Thank you, Sanjoy. That was a very nice introduction. It's also a very big question you're asking. So I'll do my best, and I'll keep it short. At HarperCollins, we have built a very large publishing house. We have teams in over 20 countries, and we do publish across 15 languages. And I think in this world of growing large tech companies, I think it's very important for book publishers to also have some global scale to push back a little bit. They seem to be dominating our lives personally, professionally, how we interact with one another. They are impacting us in so many ways. And as a book publisher, we're so fortunate to be in the business of ideas and storytelling. I often think of the services we provide to authors. We're trying to build a world, build a marketplace of ideas and bring them to the readers as far around the world as we can. And so at HarperCollins, making sure that we have enough scale and enough insight from everybody around the world to make better decisions and to try to elevate those stories, no matter where they may come from and no matter what culture or what language. And so we're working very hard at that. And over those last 10 or 15 years, we've now really broadened beyond the English language to try to make sure that we have connections and editors from as many different cultures, bringing as many different perspectives to readers. So, and the digital element, it does allow us to reach further and faster than we've ever been able to reach before. Before the advent of digital, we were limited in some ways by printing, manufacturing, and distributing physical books. And they also came with a very high cost, which the higher cost meant you couldn't reach as many people who don't have the funds or the ability to buy books. Now in the digital world, in the digital economy, we've worked very hard to try to develop different price points and different formats so that we can go further and bring these amazing ideas and stories to more and more people around the world. So we've worked hard to try to build the right business ecosystems, the right partnerships around the world in order to do that. And I will say we're still very early days. I mean, we are really still at the beginning of that. Book publishers have been around for hundreds of years. We've managed our way through all kinds of difficulties and world wars and financial crashes. And now we're entering this age of AI. And when I look back over the history, I have a lot of confidence we will come through it, but we have a lot of issues to navigate, and I'm sure we'll talk about those later. So thank you.
Ambassador, what's interesting is when the Gutenberg Press was first created, there was a huge upheaval against the possibility that the Bible would be made available to everybody, and the church to some extent rebelled. Has digital publishing in many ways democratized the very aspect of knowledge? And what's the impact of that on democracies? Are you seeing in the European Union, which is again an idea more than anything else, are you seeing an impact on that? We are seeing more and more a move to the right in some countries in the European Union.
Thanks, Sanjoy. I mean, you put me really on a slippery slope here. Thank you. Actually, I wanted to talk about digital, or what it brings for good, but also the risk. One being copyright, if you think of AI. So as you mentioned Bible, I would say, who has the copyright on the Bible? So there are things that what I would say is that the fact that actually providing larger access to textbooks of any sorts, whether holy text or texts that are written in languages that are maybe reserved to some parts of the society of the country, and in India it's the case. I was discussing with students this morning in school. I say, think of Tamil, a piece of work and literature in Tamil, which is not translated in any European language apart from English. If through the power of digitization and indeed artificial intelligence, you actually multiply the possibility to have access to all this sort of trove of literature. The thing is, the more you can enrich your, I would say, intake of sources of literature, the better it is for democracy. Democracy is nurtured by diversity, by variety of opinions. And I think it is great to have this, I would say, the turbocharged by digitization. I'd like to come at some point to AI. I don't know whether we will have a discussion, but I really would like to insist because I think digitization is maybe an easy part. I think AI is, as far as creators of content and writers, I think this is maybe the big discussion to be had. But overall, I think digitization is actually a good thing. You would say, oh, you're the representative of the EU, and the EU is known for regulation. And you know how much discussions the Europeans have now with the US. Because the owners of the big tech platform says, boo, Europe, you are too heavily regulating. In the name of the freedom of speech, you should not regulate. I mean, come on. That's nothing to do with the freedom of speech. It has to do with business, and they want to have a free reign. So I think the fact that, for example, we regulate content online has to do with framing the responsibility of these platform providers as gatekeepers, as we call them, that they cannot put whatever online. They take responsibility. So any incitement to hatred, any preaching of violence should be banned and will be banned. And I think there is a space for democracy, on the contrary, a positive one, which needs to be nurtured. And if there is a dominant sort of mainstream thinking that is taking place and taking root, it actually impoverishes our democracy, because our democracies have to be deeply rooted in diversity. And I think this is something that is very common to both India and Europe, because we have so much diversity in our respective countries. And I think the fact that democracy is maintained and that culture, literature is part of that conversation, I think is very important for us.
Mukulika, we know that democracy is roughly the best of the worst solutions that we have on offer. How is the advent of democratization and access of so much of additional information that we're seeing being fed to us, is that threatening today the very fundamentals of democracy? In earlier times, whether it was the Brahmins or the church, they controlled information, or the palaces or the kings and the queens, through their scribes. What went out? What did you look like? Today, everybody is a reporter, but everybody is an influencer at some level. How does that impact this larger world that we're talking about in terms of expression, freedoms, democracies, and the responsibility that comes with it?
So, when we talk about, you're right in the points being made about democratization through the digital medium, it's true that libraries can afford to, my students do their readings as PDFs. Publishers have got better at selling electronic versions of books, articles. That's a story we can come back to if you want. On the democratization and the implications for institutional forms of democracy and the workings of democracy in countries that we all live in, and in India, of course, we need to break up the AI story into two strands. Right? One is the algorithmic AI, and then there is generative AI. Right? Algorithmic AI is really
Everybody here is familiar with the algorithms and AI, right? Mostly, yes.
a JLF audience. I would have thought so. If you're here, okay. So algorithmic AIs, if you remember and think, and so many of us in our generation remember adopting these technologies. They were not by subscription. They were free, which was partly why we all signed up to Facebook and so on. So the revenue generation was coming through advertising. And the logic of the algorithms, the way they were written by humans, was really to ramp up engagement. That was the technology. You ramp up engagement. Once you get people hooked, then you can feed them advertising and therefore generate revenue. That is algorithmic AI, right? So it was not invented for disinformation. Generative AI, on the other hand, where you can have Taylor Swift singing songs that she's never sung, or Arijit Singh in India recently saying the same, where you can create content that whose authorship is uncertain and or infringe on the copyright of writers, poets, artists of all sorts, and generate content that you then push through. The latter, the disinformation that generative AI can produce, then lives off algorithmic AI to push that content into people's screens and on their feeds. This is the problem that we are now facing with the backsliding of democracy and the spread of disinformation and the crisis of the lack of regulation. So the point here is that the original design was not about wanting to push disinformation. The original design was really to increase engagement and advertising. Any new technology, therefore, that we think of for any new platform, Blue Sky is now out. I don't know about, in India, it doesn't seem to have picked up. All my colleagues, my circle of people in academia are all switching out of X into Blue Sky. That's the place to be. All the newspapers, international newspapers, are publishing there. Now, I hope that the model has to shift to subscription. We have to be willing to pay for these services so that we are not beholden to advertising, because it requires pushing the thing. Generative AI and the disinformation that then, if, like you said, the EU has regulations, thank goodness. In the US, we have the First Amendment. You cannot regulate speech. So there cannot be any regulation of what is said in this content. And therefore, the only recourse is copyright law. And that is a whole mess, right? And we should talk about copyright. We've got the right people on the panel.
We'll come to copyright in a second. Brian, the ambassador talked about pushing back on hatred and that being a responsibility to some extent. Publishers were always seen to be gatekeepers, and they could then choose and decide what was or good or not good, or what was for profit or not. However, today in this democratized space of self-publishing or larger publishing, that seems to have fallen by the wayside. And we are seeing books that pretty much advocate whether it's religious hatred or hatred of... So therefore, what is the role then of publishing and huge publishing empires, and I'm calling it an empire, like yourselves?
Yeah, so what happened in the US was there was a law passed to protect these emerging internet companies that freed them from any liability from the content that was published on their networks. And that is unlike all the other forms of media. If you own a television station, a radio station, newspapers, book publishing, you are responsible for the content that you have. But these laws were passed 30 years ago, and it has created this liability shield for all of these American internet companies. So Facebook is not responsible for the content, hate speech, or violence that's on there. So that was the law that was passed that enabled these businesses to grow, but there was never a law passed to level the playing field with other forms of publishing. So that's the issue that we have in the United States. I don't know if the genie can get put back in the bottle. Our role as book publishers is to continue to use that judgment. We have hundreds of editors around the world who are experienced and work very hard to make sure that there are high editorial standards for the books that we publish. Now, that said, one person may read a book and think it is hateful, and another person may say that it's not hateful. It's very hard to define that legally. But I think our editors do a very good job of trying to ensure that we have high quality professional content. And then we also try to ensure that we publish different opinions, different commentary. We try to publish all sides of religion. We try to publish all sides of politics, so that you have a chance to give voice to opposing views. And then our position is, let's let the readers decide. Let's have a debate about what the future should be. And so you have to allow those authors who have differing opinions to make their case. And book form, long form narrative, remains one of the best ways to deal with complex issues. We all can agree the 30-second snippet on X or on Instagram is not the way to deal with complex issues. So it gives me a lot of hope that book publishing will have a long future, but it's not necessarily solving the crux of the problem that I think we have today that is creating a lot of these new risks, particularly as we're on the beginning of this AI age.
Let me put you on the spot here. We've seen that, in this case, you're saying we have many different kinds of perspectives being published by folks like yourselves, which again I'm saying is a large corporation today. We've seen Elon Musk buy the presidency of the United States by buying or investing $35 billion into X. What if a Brian Murray is taken over or is replaced by, for a second, let me say, a bot or, not a good guy or somebody who does not believe in perspectives? Are there any safeguards in today's day and age in your world of publishing that will stop that?
Yeah, we see very successful social media campaigns on all types of issues. If corporations or individuals or organizations or institutions get too far outside what the collective thinks, that's one of the areas where social media can push back and can push back quite hard, quite forcefully. We see boycotts all the time. We see messaging. There are ways that common sense can prevail. It's not perfect, and it doesn't happen on the time frame we would all like. But I'm more hopeful. I think if somebody were to come in and say at HarperCollins after me and say we're only going to publish from this side or these issues, I think there would be very few authors who would want to be published by HarperCollins, and I think there would be many fewer editors who would want to work at HarperCollins, and I think readers would then begin to question all the books that come out from HarperCollins. So they're not as sharp a knife to kind of carve it away, but I do think there are many ways where there would be pushback.
I'm going to come back on the role of the editor and therefore the role of the AI editor, but that in a second. Ambassador, one of the things that I found really interesting and also strange was when I was speaking with some German publishers and I was asking them, what's your print copy run, for example, and they were saying 1,500 or 3,000 or 5,000 or whatever. And I was saying, why? And they said, no, because we get subsidized for every book that's published. We get a subsidy. And therefore, we don't really need to, push a book or whatever. What is the role that subsidy then plays in something like books and ideas? What are the kinds of books that then get subsidized, if at all? And is subsidy, because again, the way the European Union works, is subsidy, in your view, a good thing? And if so, how do you see it?
I'm not aware of any European program aiming at providing such subsidies. I think there are things that we do is to support civil society, that notably in the defense of human rights, of democracy. Whether this turns into publishing work, I think it's good because that represents values we believe in. The question of let's say, the subsidizing of creative activities, I guess there are many, historically, you've got the philanthropy that also been here, basically wealthy persons basically subsidizing activities because they believe that if someone has talent. So I wouldn't say there is anything wrong with that, in a way that it allows young creators to explore their creative universe and develop their talent. I mean, it happens that here in Delhi, I'm linked with some professional galleries that groom young talents, young artists. They don't have the means by themselves. So they receive a grant, and these are, I think there's a group of philanthropists who are behind this. I put my residence as for artist in residence for this young. So I think when you give a chance to those young artists, which otherwise would not have the possibility, it's also something. After, at the end of the day, if the art piece, the work, the writing is good, it's picked up. If it's not picked up, well, sorry. The question is whether it runs as a business for the publishers. That's a different story. That's a different story because I think maybe Brian has more to say on that one. But at the heart of all this, what I think is the creativity, what is at the heart of literature, of any form of art, is the creativity. And I really would like to bring us to the AI story, which is in a way, when we say AI, we have the impression that something else, that it's not human. It's very human, AI. It's the extension of our humanity. It's our exobrain, it's our mirror. It's a distorting mirror of our society, of all what we do, because there is a data set that brings it into the AI. Is how the AI is sort of activated algorithmically or generatively. But I think for me, it raises fundamental questions with the very fact of creativity, whether in literature and others. The other day, I found this quite interesting example of a very famous music online streaming platform. That, you know, you listen to your favorite music, you have your playlist, and sometimes it generates automatically playlists, you know, sort of favorite styles. There are some platforms that have AI-generated playlists that feeds your taste. They call this perfect fit content. And you don't know. It raises three problems, in my view. Trust and transparency. You should know that it is AI-generated. Second, it poses a problem of eviction for the real artist that lives from copyrights and they are not longer on the playlist. And third, this generates automatically a sort of mainstream of the type of music, therefore curtailing, undercutting creativity, which is the very nature of art. It's so human. So I just give this example because I apply it to music. You could apply it to art in the other forms or literature. And this is where we really need to ask ourselves, what is AI is bringing? And therefore, the EU has put this AI Act, which is the very first act of regulation. And some may dislike it because they say we need to maintain the space for innovation. But if you don't have a flow of regulation, what can happen? And I think that is the big question, which also applies to everything that has to do with creative content. Because again, who is the creator? Who has the copyright if you have art generated by AI? The provider? Or the artist that whose product has been fed into the AI?
Many artists.
So there is a problem that AI, who has the copyright? Who will earn the money? If all the money will be siphoned out by the big platforms, with again the risk of the writers being evicted, then maybe answering your question, maybe we should subsidize the authors against the power of the AI platform.
Mukulika ambassador talked about young people, their rights, the need for platforms in which they can express themselves. Universities have to be that platform. At the London School of Economics, when you had the sit-in on Palestine, Gaza, you and I walked and saw the kind of creativity, an outpouring of creativity in the hall where the young people were sitting. And yet the university chose to shut them down. I, as a young person, spent most of my time either protesting or in jail as a young person in university here. But that's what made me. because I knew that you had a responsibility to speak up. You had a responsibility to fight for democracy every day, every hour, every minute. And yet the London School of Economics shuts down this space for a freedom of expression.
Okay, this is a slightly complicated answer because it's a complicated question. And my answer might not be what you're expecting, Sanjoy, I should say. To start with, put the record straight, the students held their occupation for many weeks, right? So it's not as if this was not what happened on several US campuses. The police weren't called on them. They were not evicted. They had the space. And in the end, yes, there was a bureaucratic reason that was found. They were violating fire, health and safety records. The London Fire Brigade said it wasn't safe. There was no access to the upper floors. They'd occupied the newest, shiniest building. Good on them. Of course, if you must occupy something that grabs eyeballs. So there was a lot of space for students to do this. But you know what is interesting, what you're asking, is just this morning, I have received an email from work, all faculty have received this, that there is also a growing recognition that a campus, as indeed elsewhere, that's what civil society is for, needs a greater and greater spaces creatively thought about for face-to-face interaction. Because one thing we know, we talk about polarized electorates, we talk about false fake narratives, disinformation, some people want to believe it, some people don't believe it. You believe one side of the story, other side of the story. And not to be controversial, but I think there is something about protest politics that also disables a conversation with another point of view. And it has become very urgent for those of us, and I count myself amongst them, who feel very strongly about an issue like a genocide. You know, there are not two sides to a genocide. It's either a genocide or not. But can we still have a conversation to persuade people who are less sure about protest? Is there a way of bringing them in? And social media is not working for that. Right? So it's in a funny way. If you look at people, you know, I just heard Lawrence Lessig, who is professor of law at Harvard and has been working in this space. He started this thing called the Applied Social Media Lab, and they're looking at alternative models. And it was interesting. Larry was talking about the need for greater citizen assemblies, which are really small groups of people coming together to deliberate. You know, democracy has to be deliberative. You have to discuss, you've got to agree despite divergent views and find a solution that people can, you know, go away and think about, which you can then ask your politicians to hold them to account for. It's making democracy work in a different way. It is not just about elections, which have their own set of problems, and I think we have a panel later in the festival to talk about that. But to think about how do you create dialogue, and even with 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are a social media generation. They've come into age engaging with social media. It's very different, their relationship to it. Even they want more dialogue, right? Face-to-face dialogue. So a university becomes an absolutely critical formative space where you have to think, and the email I received was for us to, it's a call to ask us to think about how we can engineer these, what kind of, you know, does it have to be a soapbox? Does it require people to sit in a circle? How do you make sure it is inclusive, that people, you know, they did a survey of students and it's a shocking figure, 45% or 48% of students felt that they could not speak their mind even in classrooms for fear of retribution, both from students and faculty. That's not a university. You may be saying the wrong thing, but if you're not going to say it at university, when are you going to say it? And, you know, as faculty, we need to be able to listen and have a discussion. So you see what I'm saying? The Gaza thing, I think, really polarized people. And we need to get back to a space where we can have conversation, and that we have to rethink not just social media, but also face-to-face interaction.
Brian talked about, you know, again, the need for freedoms in a sense. We're seeing that anybody who doesn't agree with a book or its content, your first reaction is burn it or ban it. More and more in the United States, certainly in Florida and Texas. Recently, you've seen a ban on Diary of Anne Frank, on Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. It's really going back to, say, Lady Chatterley's Lover when it was banned in the early 20th century or 19th century. Here too in India, we banned the import of Salman Rushdie's books. We banned it at that point of time of that particular book. Now it's back in the bookstores because the ban has been lifted and it doesn't seem to have made any impact per se. What are the legal remedies today to be able to push back on that? And what is it that you ban today when it's on digital and when it's accessible?
So the U.S. book banning issue is more complex, I think, than the media lets on. There are no books that are banned. I'm not being told I can't publish anything, I can't distribute anything. There's no retailers that are being told they can't sell anything. But there is an issue in schools and in libraries. Right. So this is not a statewide federal ban on publishing or expressing yourself. But there's a legitimate discussion and debate about what is appropriate for children at what age. And many of the books that have been banned in certain states, there's a few states, maybe 10 or so, that have passed legislation at the state level that is, at best, you could say, misguided, unconstitutional, and in that case, publishers, authors organizations, publishers associations, and HarperCollins, we are involved in lawsuits at the state level in order to unwind, again, the best thing you could say is misguided legislation. So these things are rolling through. What we're seeing in the United States is when gridlocked politicians at the federal level cannot pass anything, it moves to the states, and we see often somewhat crazy legislation being passed in the states. It's happened around ebooks, just the business model of ebooks. Now it's happening with the curation. What's the appropriate book for the appropriate child? Try writing that into law. It is not an easy thing to do. The old way, which is really the way it has been done for many years, was up to the local school board, the local teachers, the parents. There was a process in order to determine what was appropriate. But now we've had, with these cultural wars in the US, it's become popular fundraising for certain politicians, sometimes on both sides, to raise money to win the election. So it's a little more subtle than, there is no federal ban at the moment. Who knows what happens as we go forward. But in all of these cases, HarperCollins gets involved with lawyers, we bring lawsuits, and we focus on the law, and we try to stay a little bit away from the politics. And what we've seen so far is many of these are clearly unconstitutional, and we feel confident we'll win.
European Union has recently brought out the law that you talked about in terms of digital and AI, etc. Tell us a little bit about it, and what is it that it will protect? And what do we need? What is it that you all see will be beneficial from this particular new regulation?
I think the best way to describe what underwrites and underpins the EU approach to digital and services and AI is the notion of human-centric. So it's not driven by the business case, there is one, or the economic opportunism. Is at the core whether it's actually responding to human needs in a way that is consistent with our democratic environment and our democratic rights. I think that is really what captures the essence of all our regulation. So one may dispute that our regulations are too heavy-handed, that they can be really fall out of pace with the development of technology, which is also a risk. And that's the reason why for AI, ACT has been very simply about categorizing in 4 levels of risk. And I think to make it simpler and not to be sort of trailing behind the development of technology. So I think there is an obligation for AI or digital service providers, transparency. You know what you see, where it comes from, who is behind. I think to know as a consumer, as a citizen, you should know. So the rule of transparency is for me the first one. The second is that the platform, the big platform, the gatekeepers have a responsibility for content which is put there online. You cannot put whatever, and they cannot simply, have a big disclaimer, it's not my responsibility. Well, they are making money of it. So basically, they have a responsibility. So if you take responsibility, on top of it, they take our data and they make money out of it. So I think this notion of gatekeeper and moderation of content to avoid that it becomes a sort of echo chamber of the worst of our societies, of, again, as I mentioned, incitement to violence or racism or those things. I think this is, again, at the core of this legislation, is to prevent this kind of bias that is generated either automatically AI or by the platforms. And I think the last one is really about preserving diversity. And I think that is, for me, an absolute element of that is a integral part of our democracies. What I was listening to what you described, it made me think about, and I quoted this morning when I was in that school, what Voltaire said, which for me encapsulates so much the spirit of democracy. I disagree with you, but I will fight to death for you to have the right to keep your ideas. And I think that, for me, encapsulates, because basically you are putting a case for difference of opinions, but as you said, you need to have places for that. And I think that's the most important. And if I can say, because I've worked in the Middle East, unfortunately, many years, I've been on both sides, in the Israel and Palestine. I was so much in Gaza, and for me it's heartbreaking. So that's the reason why I pull out of everything that relates to that, because I have friends there on both sides. But one thing that really struck me over years is that the visible and invisible walls that have been erected between Israelis and Palestinians, that have become unknown entities to each other. So they could not even, before they were neighbors, they were in the same street. Now it's an alien concept. And I think this is, for me, the danger of anything, also especially in our societies, where polarization is brought to such an extent that it kills democracy. So I think whatever brings links, spaces for debate, and art, literature is very powerful in that way, need to be nurtured, because otherwise our democracies will dry off.
I'm going to open the house for questions in a second. Mukulika, just to sort of round off, as an anthropologist now, in many ways, how do you see, the idea of any institution, especially an academic institution, is to further the idea of having people question. Are you seeing over the years of your academic career, this is something that is gaining traction because of digital access, inquiry and questioning?
I think it's made it easier. Our students, I'm very lucky, I teach at LSE, the students are fabulous. I don't see any, the young people are genuinely curious and argumentative and want to read. And I don't think the digitalization or democratization of space has made a huge difference. I don't think that, I have a lot of faith in that generation. The one thing to say, though, is when you were speaking, Ambassador, about the kind of art that you support, our students are also very aware of what is happening. They are the consumers. And they hold up examples like Creative Commons, Wikipedia. There are wonderful democratized cooperative spaces on the internet, which are about protecting copyright, which are collaborative. And we really need to be supporting those too, not just saying, this is all bad, let's go talking in person. And just to round up this discussion, I think we have to end with a wonderful irony. I don't know, some of you may have heard of this, that OpenAI, which is the California-based company, is now got their, as the British would say, their knickers in a twist about the Chinese AI platform. You saw this DeepSeek that has copied and violated the copyright of OpenAI in making up theirs. And I think this is wonderful. Now they know what authors and writers feel like. Thank you.
Yeah. Questions? Sudeep. We'll take them in clusters. So Sudeep and then Shesh, and then we'll put them together so we can take a few. Go for it.
Sanjoy, you brought up a very, very important point of subsidy which didn't get discussed fully. And it's an important one because subsidies in the European Union do exist in the publishing sector. Maybe not as a EU policy, but at the national policy, it certainly exists. Where does subsidy help? I've been a beneficiary of this. Small publishers, literary publishers, get grants to publish literature, polemics, whatever, that may or may not be A, easily translated, B, are obscure but very important, and they need a push. So if the publishing houses, now these subsidies come from...
Question, Sudeep.
Yeah. So I just want to say that it is very important at that level. One needs to understand why it works. And in India it doesn't, because subsidies normally come from national bodies such as the Sahitya Academy or the National Dutch
NBT,
Foundation,
NBT.
NBT, and so on and so forth. It's very important for democracy, really.
Subsidy is very important. Shesh? Somebody help him with the mic, please.
Can you hear me? Yep. Right. Brilliant conversation. I'm glad you brought up the fact about OpenAI and DeepSeek. It's just amazing. Question for each one of you, actually. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. When a brilliant book written by an AI gets published, would you publish it, HarperCollins? Would you teach it at LSE? Would you include it in the JLF?
We are only about human-created content. Copyright is the foundation of our business. We support authors, writers, and other creators. And you need to have a human who's part of the storytelling. And I am not so confident that Gen AI will be able to ever write the brilliant novel. So we'll see. Time will tell. But my money is on they will not be able to.
Will you teach it?
It's more than teaching. Our students are using ChatGPT already. So this is an ongoing conversation in all universities. Students are writing essays are submitting essays that ChatGPT has written for them. And they're sourcing, ChatGPT is sourcing things which is non-transparent. There's no copyright of that. That it's mining the work of people who write, but produces this content. So therefore, all kinds of measures are in place to try. Now, the way to do it, I think, is not to ban it. That's one thing we've realized, is that we can't ban it. The cheap version, the free version of ChatGPT is there. So we're actually educating our students to think about issues of copyright and transparency. Also that they're paying a lot of money to learn to write, so not to give it to somebody else. And thirdly, to use ChatGPT to learn to do essay plans, how to use it to become a better writer, which is a much more healthy relationship to AI.
In more recent years, Marcus du Sautoy and we did an experiment and loaded onto a system all of J.K. Rowling's books and then said, create, the next version. And it opened really fabulously. There was thunder and lightning and it was all overcast and the clouds were gray. And the door of the castle creaked open and Hermione steps out. And she heads to the rock. And she sits there and starts eating her brain. So it fell apart at that point of time. But to answer your question, we are a platform. We're an equitable platform. If there is something that comes about that we need to consider, well, this is a platform. It's for you to consider whether it's good, bad, or ugly, not us. We can't be the gatekeepers to that.
No, so we had the different version, the publisher, the professor. I'm also a professor, so also my students also. We have rules against plagiarism and, of course, from ChatGPT generated. But I think from the regulation, I think the trajectory, I think, has to be in some form of regulation, because if you don't, I think that hell can break loose in so many different ways, and especially for the artists, for the authors. I think, as you said, copyright is so essential. And it's all about human creativity. Copyright is pinned on human creativity. So we need also to protect this.
On that very happy note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Join me in thanking Ambassador Herve Delphin,
So,
Professor
thank you very
Mukulika
much.
Banerjee, and CEO Brian Murray. Thank you all. Have a wonderful festival.